So my name's Ben James. I'm Director of UQP, and I'm just going to provide a short introduction before Madonna's presentation in a moment. Millions of people have been influenced by UQP books over our history. We connect readership with people that have ideas. We connect readers with writers who have knowledge and insight. We connect readers with writers who have stories worth telling, who have a vision for our planet and for our future, and that understand the world around us. And you have stories worth telling, and you have a vision for our planet, and you understand the world around us. And our books are read by young and old people. They are read in cities and countries. They are bought in bookshops. They are read in libraries. They are taught on school curricula. Our books, the UQP books, are read across the world, and they are read in different languages. For me, every time a book is published about conservation and biodiversity, it bridges a gap between science and mainstream conversations and mainstream culture. And you can have that influence. What you do is fascinating and sometimes terrifying. It's highly relevant, and it is optimistic. There is optimism in your knowledge. And the reason for me and Madonna coming here today is that we hope very much that we can work together to share what you know. And that's part of why we exist as a university press. So I'm going to turn over to Madonna now, who will present the bulk of the presentation today.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone, and thanks to Daniel and Kate and the team at the Centre for having us early morning tea this morning over Zoom. I've got a PowerPoint presentation to go with my talk, really just to support the words. So just give me a second and I'll swing over to that now to do the share screen. Can I just get a thumbs up if you can see what I'm seeing? Can you see the UQP logo? Great. Okay.
We can see it. Yeah.
We're on. Okay. Well, I guess this was also to let some of you know, you may be from countries all around the world. Some of you may not have been aware that the University of Queensland has its own publishing house. So that's a wonderful thing. I think Australia has probably 4 main university presses who are still active. UQP, UNSW have one called New South, Melbourne University have one, MUP, and UWA. So, who are sort of actively publishing books. So we thought it'd be good for you to know that you have a publishing house on your campus, or at least we're at Long Pocket actually, so one of the campuses, and for you to know a little bit more about what we do. And if any of you end up moving towards writing longer form work in this year or coming years, you'll know we're here. So I'll just talk a little bit about our history and who we are, just to give you some background. We're 73 years old this year. We're one of the older publishing houses in Australia. We started in 1948, and I think for the first 20 years or so, we were publishing lecture notes. It was all fairly basic at that time. But then in the 1970s, we moved more into what we call trade publishing, which is more general books. And there was a maverick American called Frank Thompson who came from Chicago, and University of Chicago Press, I think. And he thought, why couldn't a university press do trade books of value? And he was very interested in the areas of fiction and poetry, for example. So he started publishing a few little-known authors. One was a guy called Peter Kerry. So I don't know if many of you read fiction, but obviously Peter Kerry is one of Australia's most famous exports as a fiction writer. He's won 2 Booker Prizes for his work, and UQP was his publisher for 28 years. So we certainly, landed very much on the map by being Peter Kerry's publisher. There's just a few covers there in front of you. There might be some names you're familiar with. We in the 1980s established, a leading list for Indigenous writers when many other publishers were not doing that. And certainly Doris Pilkington Garamara's book Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence, which became a famous international film, was also one of the titles that UQP published. And another little known at the time writer in the 1970s who was picked up for publication was a fellow called David Malouf, who's also gone on to become a living national treasure, literary treasure in Australia as a novelist and a poet. This is a picture of his first novel, Jono, which was published in 1975 and has been in print for 45 or more plus years. And we still publish David's poetry. We just published his last volume, an open book, a couple of years ago. So that's just a little look at some of the big names. If you're readers, if you read a bit of fiction or poetry or otherwise, you may know some of those names. We publish about 40 new titles each year across a number of areas. Obviously in non-fiction, in the humanities, history, politics, current affairs, biography, memoir, and then in, the sciences also, could be environment, science, popular science. Then we publish some fiction, as you would have seen on the previous screen. We do a few poetry titles a year as well. We also publish books for children and young adults. I guess you could call it a cradle to grave publishing model. I like to think that we are, providing books for children, instilling in them a love of reading that will carry them through their lives. A lot of those young readers end up studying at UQ and reading UQP books through their lives. So we've had a children's and young adult publishing list for also more than 30 years. I guess our position in the national publishing landscape is books that matter, publishing books that focus on issues of diversity, supporting and discovering emerging voices, and non-fiction that, is issues-based, that looks at the important topics of the day and encourages debate around them. We've got a long history, over 30 years of publishing First Nations writers, and we continue that commitment today. So that's a little bit about us. We're a small to medium-sized publishing house. We've got 16 staff based at the Long Pocket campus these days, but we used to be on the St Lucia campus for several decades. I thought I'd share with you a few recent titles that what we call trade books, which means they're published for, a general audience in the book trade, but they all came from academic origins. So A River with a City Problem by Margaret Cook, we published in 2019, and, it's a history of the Brisbane floods from the late 1800s, the big floods in 74 and obviously in 2011. And Margaret takes a look across history to try and understand what we could have learned, should have learned, haven't learned. And this was based on her doctorate at UQ, the School of Com Arts. The cover in the centre of the screen, Samia Khartoum's Australian Armour, looks at she's a feminist scholar in Asian history and looks at the South Asian diaspora in Australia. And that went on to win Best Scholarly Book in the Educational Publishing Awards, and also, as you can see, was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards. And then the cover on the right is a book by leading Australian Indigenous visual artist Fiona Foley called Biting the Clouds. And it looks at, she's a Bajala woman from Fraser Island, and she looks at this particular act that was in place in the late 1800s that was used as a means of, a lot of Aboriginal people at the time were actually paid in opium, and obviously that led to major addiction problems. So the government put in place this act that enabled them to displace a lot of Aboriginal people and put them on what we came to know as all the reserves and missions. So Fiona has written a really important book, Biting the Clouds, about that, and we published that late last year. Now that also grew out of Fiona's PhD, and I think the important thing to know with thesis is that if you've done your PhD, no publisher will actually pick it up from being a thesis. There's a whole process that you need to consider, if you're approaching for publishers for book publication. And I can give you some tips about where you can find that information, what you can do. But I just thought it'd be useful for you to see some of the books that UQP have published that have sort of come out of the academic origins but have reached a broader readership. One of our success stories in this area is a book called Call of the Reed Warbler. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it or read it, but certainly Charles Massey, the author, was featured on Australian Story in September. It's a wonderful episode. If anyone's interested, do go and check it out. It's a book about regenerative agriculture, based on Charlie's experiences as a farmer. He's got a farm down in Canberra. He inherited from his father, and his many years as a traditional farmer made him look at farming methods and realising he could not keep going like that, and became interested in regenerative agriculture and uses these methods on his farm. And it's clearly been a major global phenomenon in recent years, and is changing all the time. We published this book in 2017, and it was based on Charles's doctorate as well. And then we did an updated edition with a new introduction, which also factored in developments in regenerative agriculture in the last few years to coincide with Australian Story airing in September last year. So it's a big book. It's nearly 600 pages. So it defied everyone's expectations at the time. As you can see, we've sold over 30,000 copies across the print and ebook formats in Australia. It retails for nearly $40, but clearly it was a subject that struck a moment in time, and there was a real thirst for information about regenerative agriculture. So I would say we don't unfortunately sell 30,000 copies of all of our more serious books, but certainly this is a fabulous success story, and it just goes to show that the right topic at the right time, written in the right way, can actually really, take off. It also has been honoured with some awards recognition. It won the Scholarly Nonfiction Book in the Educational Publishing Awards category, shortlisted for several other national awards as well. We sold rights to American publishers, so there's a publisher in the US that have published an edition there. And I'll talk a little bit later about the publishing journey and the sorts of things that can happen, but part of what we do as well is we either distribute our own edition into foreign markets, or we try to sell rights to publishers in those countries who do their own edition of it. And in this case, the US publisher actually used our cover as well, but they sometimes will revise the text for local publication. And I think there is also an audio book. We sold audio book rights. So that's Call of the Reed Warbler. Certainly if you haven't heard of it, do check it out and have a look at that Australian Story episode. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what the publishing journey looks like here at UQP. I mean, you may, if you're thinking about, writing something longer form, that, adapting a journal article or a book chapter for something longer, that may be well ahead of you, but I think it's worth knowing what the process is, in case you're ever in that situation. certainly UQP, through our website, uqp.com.au, we accept submissions in the first week of each month. And there's a whole, if you go to the submissions section of our website, it'll explain what you need to do. There's a submissions template which asks you to consider things like, you know, why you've written a book, you know, a bit about you, a synopsis of the manuscript, who the audience would be, you know, a bit about, you know, your aspirations for it. But again, they, you know, if you're at a point of having a doctoral thesis, you will need to think about revising it for publisher submission, and that means a number of things. There's material, if you Google, you know, revising doctorates for publication, there are a number of websites that give you information, but it's things like removing all the academic scaffolding that you need for your thesis, you know, if you won't need it for commercial book publication, reorganising the material potentially when you're writing for the general reader, refocusing, you know, clearly on the heart of what your argument is, and reducing that scholarly apparatus, like all, you know, all the footnotes and exhaustive bibliography, all of those items you need for your supervisors and for examination, and also rewriting. And I think sometimes the style in which you might write for your peers or for examination for your doctorate will be quite different to maybe trying to write for an informed general reader. You have to sort of move away from the impersonal, abstract academic style and get rid of all the academic jargon. So it's a bit of a retraining that's required if you're thinking about writing for that more general audience. So if you do get to a point of having a manuscript, and look, we'd even consider partial manuscripts, but it has to be very well thought through. There needs to be a full chapter outline, and there also, you know, needs to be some of the chapters there, but it doesn't always have to be completed before you submit to a publisher. Sometimes we will, you know, if we're confident that the author can actually get the work done in the time frame, we might contract a project prior to it being completed. So then that you'll see through that process that we, you know, we I guess if it's something we think that will work for UQP, the publisher, the individual publisher will contact you directly to discuss it further. We would get peer reviews for anything that is, you know, a serious academic project or an expert reader's report if it's something that, you know, we would, I'm a great generalist in what I do, but I don't expect to be an expert in all fields in which we publish. So we have people to hand who we go to for peer reviews as necessary. We have a monthly acquisitions meeting, and at that meeting there's a committee of 9 people. The publisher has to put forward a proposal and a costing and a sample of the manuscript and a peer review or reader's report. And I guess as a committee we look at, you know, whether this project might sell enough for it to be, you know, viable for us. We discuss whether there is a market for that project. There might be too many other books in the marketplace that are similar, or we might feel that it's not the right time for that manuscript. So, you know, there's always very robust debate about whether a project will be appropriate for UQP. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we feel it's not right for our list, but that's not to say it mightn't get published elsewhere. If we receive approval to offer at that meeting, we send a letter of offer to the author, and the author receives a publishing contract as well, outlining the financial terms of book publication, including what royalties the author would receive, what territories we'd offer to be publishing in, or license, and also, you know, if there's an advance involved, what that might be. An advance is usually literally that, an advance on the royalties you might earn. So if you get a few $1,000s at the front of the process, you have to earn back that advance before you start earning royalties for the book. Look, I'll take questions at the end, so please, you know, if you've got any burning questions, just hold on to them and I'll answer them when I'm finished. Once we have that offer accepted, we look at the best publishing date for that project, and we also set up a production schedule for the book for the key milestones where the author will need to be involved. The author gets assigned an editor at UQP, and the author would work with the editor to polish and prepare the manuscript for publication. And this can be several stages too if structural work is required. Sometimes, you know, the manuscript isn't structured in the best possible way for its readership. Sometimes we'll look at tone, we'll look at style, and obviously at a copy edit level, someone is also checking for grammar and punctuation and repetition and all of those things. So by the time the manuscript finds its way to its readers as a book, it should be sparkling and polished and is, well, hopefully perfect. The production process, I won't go into too much detail, but we use a group of cover designers who are all freelance, and we brief a cover. Actually, you'll see there's the picture of the book on the side is a book called Principled, which was written by Paul Browning. We published that a year ago. He's the principal of St Paul's College in Brisbane at Ball Hills, and it's a really interesting book on trust and leadership. So you'll see, you know, with that cover, we wanted something that was quite clear, quite strong colours, simple in its message, and you know, obviously that he's a school principal, and it's the ideas of principles of building trust with leadership. So hence the title. With the editing, there'll be a manuscript edit, and then we typeset the manuscript, so it gets turned into InDesign files, and the author sees a set of page proofs to check. We also have a professional proofreader read every book as well, outside of the publisher and editor and the author. We'll commission an index if required. So we're always sort of thinking about what's inside the book and will it align, is it what the reader needs to get the best experience. And then about 3 or 4 months out from publication, we have a great marketing team for people, and there's a marketing plan is designed for your book that will hopefully, you know, get it into the hands of the readers for that book. So we think about not just you know, getting it out into the book trade, but if it's specialist magazines or specialist publications, whether it's a book that will benefit more from being radio interviews, or does it need digital advertising? Is it a publicity-driven book? Is it an advertising-driven book? It depends a lot on the topic and on the author's ability to actually get out there and promote it. And I think, as with everything these days, we rely more and more on the author to be on that journey with us, to help take some responsibility for the promotion. Clearly, if writers have got a social media following and they're active and they're you know, participating there, then that's very helpful. It's not a defining factor for us when we're looking at what's published, but certainly if a writer has got an established platform and a following on whatever social media platform that is working for their topic, then that's fantastic, and we're always happy to sort of collaborate with them there. UQP books are sold and distributed in Australia via Penguin Random House. So we're a small to medium-sized publisher, but we use one of the major publishing houses to do our selling into bookshops, our warehousing and our distribution. So most of UQP's books, people are quite surprised to know, live in a warehouse on the edge of Melbourne at a place called Scoresby's with millions of other books with Penguin Random House. So we're an agency of Penguin Random House, but we found that it gives us the best combination of being able to offer an intimate editorial and publishing experience, but your book gets to be sold in and has the machinery of a big publishing house, because you get the sales and distribution of a big publishing house. We also have distribution in North America as well through another company. So that's a little bit about the publishing journey if you end up there. I thought I'd just talk a little about a specific book that's just come out this month, in fact, Mind Your Brain, where we've had a specialist author, so an author who's an expert in his field, and we published it, and he wanted this book to reach a sort of a general audience. So Kylas Roberts is a psychogeriatrician based in Brisbane, and he's a specialist in dementia assessment and you know, it's his clinical practice. But he just felt there was a real gap in the market for a book that was in plain English for those living with dementia, their carers, and also for people who are interested in the brain and thinking ahead about how they can, you know, make choices in their life to try and prevent dementia or stave it off as long as possible. So that was the thinking behind this book. Kylas had actually written the whole manuscript before we knew about it. And he was actually referred to me by another author in Brisbane that I knew. So that was how this particular project came to UQP. And he'd done a very good job already, I guess, of structuring it in a way that, and writing it in a way that was going to work for that audience. I always say that our job as publishers is really to be the bridge between the author and the reader, and to make sure that they're connecting up. So when we had the manuscript, we went to acquisitions, we made an offer, but there was a lot of conversation at the time too around what other books were out there in the market. And the reason that we signed this book for publication is the more research I did on it, I realised lots of the books in the market were American, and a lot of them were written by medical specialists. They weren't written in an accessible way for people who are just moving into this particular period of life, or the carers. And there seemed to me to be a gap in the market. So we felt that when we were thinking about how we positioned this book, it was very important to own the fact that it was Australian authored, because a lot of the resources that are suggested and a lot of the support that's available is in this book is listed. It's Australian. So, you know, we thought that was an important selling point. Yes, we contracted it a year ago. So a year is a sort of standard amount of time for us to take a book from manuscript through to publication. Partly that's because the Penguin Random House arrangement we have, the reps sell in the books about 4 months before the book is released. And we have to provide covers and sales materials 7 months prior to the book being published. So it's a very long lead time. It doesn't take that long to make a book, but it takes that long to properly prepare it for publication. And I guess make sure that we have got, you know, we've contacted booksellers and that we've sold it in and that we've prepared it for its audience as well as we can. So some of the challenges with this manuscript was that Kylas had already had a lot of illustrations in there. This is something to think about if you're looking at commercial publication. He didn't actually own a lot of the illustrations that were in the manuscript. I explained to him that he really needed to either clear permission for them and pay to use them in a book. You can't just take illustrations off the internet, or you need to commission illustrations specifically for the book and pay for them, so he owned them, which is actually what he did. He found a medical illustrator and he you know, got them all done himself, so he owned them. But there were still too many, so we had to cut those back. The consistency and the tone of the language weren't even throughout. You know, sometimes he slipped into medical language, and then sometimes it was too simplistic, so we worked with him to just sort of make that more even. I think I mentioned, you know, just thinking about the cover and the title, we particularly wanted to mention the words Australia, dementia, obviously. We talked about whether the word dementia would be in the book title, but we felt that actually a subtitle was going to work better. And, you know, we obviously then talked about the marketing and publicity plan for the book. And so he's done a lot of radio this month on ABC. Clearly it's a topic that lots of people want to talk about. The Courier Mail, Q Weekend magazine did a big feature on him and the book a couple of weekends ago. Various libraries want him to come along and do talks. We've also pitched it to specialist senior publications and dementia organisations as part of our thinking about that marketing and publicity. So I just thought you might find it interesting to sort of look at that one book and see, well, you know, how it's made its way to publication. I thought I'll just quickly run through How much time have I got, Kate? Shall I wrap up in 5 minutes if you're still 5? Yeah, good. Okay. So if you are thinking about, working on something longer form, and even if you're not, I think a lot of these tips will apply to, if you're wanting to get shorter pieces published in journals or online. But clearly a lot of these points I guess are focused more on long form manuscripts and book publication. But, like everything, research your field and know the other authors who are being published in, whatever area of biodiversity or conservation, whatever your particular area is, and who are they published with. And finding other book authors whose work you admire and you read, I think is really important, because then you've got a model there, and you can sort of see the publishers that are doing work in that area. Build your writing profile, build your writing CV. I think that applies to everyone who's trying to build an academic career these days. Clearly the academic journals are still important, but just be conscious of opportunities outside of those traditional avenues, obviously, online with sites such as the conversation. So yeah, there are obviously opportunities. They may not be in Australia. I guess just be aware of what publications and journals and online opportunities exist. Have a think about who your readers are. Are they going to be your peers? Are they students? Could it be a textbook? Or are you interested in getting your message to a general informed audience in this area? I think knowing your audience, thinking about your reader at the outset is so important, because if you've missed that mark, it's very hard to sort of unpick it and start again. If you're looking at a manuscript for publication, really no more than 80,000 words. I have seen some extraordinary 200,000 word tomes along the way through my career. They're just not publishable at that length. Even 100,000 is really way too long, and most publishers will balk at that length. So 60 is fine as well. I'd say 60 to 80,000 words would give you a publishable length. Think about your structure and start with the chapter outline and try and stick to it. They're so important when you're planning a longer manuscript, because otherwise you can end up writing into the void and getting completely lost. Obviously find some trusted peers around you who will give you honest feedback along the way. And that doesn't mean your partner or your siblings or your children or your best friend. I think, finding people who will give you that honest feedback on the content, it's really important. If you're thinking about images to go in the piece or the longer manuscript, consider that they're the right resolution, that you own them, or at least you have permission to use them. And then certainly too many images is a problem in other ways for the publisher. So I think be flexible about the images themselves, because, 4-color publishing is much more expensive than black and white publishing. So these are all, the costs of using images are all a factor. Again, know which publishers are working actively in your chosen field. They may be publishers in the US, they may be publishers in the UK, they may be publishers here in Australia, and find out what their submission guidelines are. And it's okay to submit to more than one publisher at a time. We understand. We don't expect you to wait 2 months for us and then get a response and then go to another publisher. All publishers accept that, that's fine. And just a little word on the fact that the publishing world is divided into territories. So you can actually have a different publisher in Australia to your US publisher to your UK publisher, or one publisher can license world rights from you and sell on those rights to other countries. As I was saying with Charles Massey's book, we licensed world rights from Charles and then sold on the US rights to a publisher for him. So, you can think of the world as, a lot of different territories, and you don't just have to have one publisher. And I guess just to wrap up, before I take questions, these are all of our handles, our social media handles. We'd love you to follow us, watch out for us, support us, and better still, you can become a UQP member if you visit our website. You get 20% off your first purchase. So certainly, just not even just for your own reading, or if you've got families, there's always a gift right on your doorstep. So But I'm happy to take questions, Kate, if you wanted to facilitate.